Victoria, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Wonderful. Well, I have been doing some research on you, and you are quite the influencer in terms of leadership and for women being a role model. And I'm just honored and excited to have you here. We're talking about the theme of elevating mindful leadership through the art of storytelling. And I thought maybe I will take a moment and have you maybe share with us the journey, the story as you arrived into leadership.
Sure. I'll try and make it fairly like short and concise, but Shilpa, I came into like leadership at such an early age. I So I actually started working when I was 11 years old. I'm sure that's not allowed anymore. I'm sure there's some child labor laws, but I did work in a hair salon. And then at 14 was my first leadership role. So I was the assistant manager for the shoe store that I worked at back then, which was interesting because I had some people that were reporting to me that were like 20 or 30 years my senior. And that's kind of a common theme for me. I continued to work. I moved into the corporate world while I was in university. I started at 16 or just barely 17. I worked in a bank. It was flexible hours to accommodate my school schedule, and I got promoted through the ranks very, very quickly into leadership. And my first executive role, in fact, came at only age 24. So although I'd had many years of work experience and many in a leadership role, it was still a very big stretch role for me. I got recruited out of that banking environment. By the way, I thought I was going to be a lawyer, but I turned out I love the corporate world. I love the complexity. I love the leadership role that I was in. So what I thought was just putting off a year before I go to law school just never came to fruition. I followed my passion. And so at age 24, I got recruited to be the chief operating officer for a large private outsourcing company. And in large part, they had large banking clients, and I'd been running large call center operations, which was predominantly what the outsourcing environment was at that point. I was also a brand new mother, and I'm going to say I think early in my executive leadership roles and journey, I'm not always so proud of how I showed up. And just in that, I don't think I stepped into my like authentic self. I feel like there were many things that I've always been very focused on around diversity and inclusion, and I tried to create great cultures. But where I got it wrong was I feel like I showed up with this mask where I was going to be all business all the time. I was the youngest by 2 decades, the only woman, and I happen to be a member of the LGBT community. I was married to a woman for 11 years before now being married to my husband. And so for all those reasons, I was just like, a little bit of, I don't like the phrase imposter syndrome, but I think I felt that. And so I was definitely not showing emotion. I was keeping it to business. I was not being vulnerable. And I got a nickname as the Iron Maiden for being really good at business and managing performance, but not really being the like whole human softie that I actually am. And so then I had to shift my leadership journey really intentionally in ways that weren't always comfortable for me. So that now I am known as the turtle. I do have a very tough exterior, resilient shell, but I'm soft on the inside. And I've got this great balance between achieving business outcomes, but doing it by creating really great culture and building really great leadership teams.
I love the idea that you were aware of your passion. Not everyone can tune into that at a young age. Could you share what was the catalyst for making the shifts once you've recognized I'm in the space of being or performing in my passion, but then knowing that maybe it was time to go a little more inward?
I I don't even know where it was. Like I said initially, it was just like I'm just gonna put it off. I'll go to law school. I'll go to law like later. And it's just I think I was just experiencing a lot of joy. And so this has been a common sort of through line for me in my life. And really much more so, in the last like 15 or so years where I don't do things that don't bring me personal or professional joy or value. I say no, I delegate or I outsource. And so even back then, it was just doing the things that brought me joy. So I think that's, how I knew. But I will be super transparent that I think there was an element of my leadership and rise up the corporate ladder that was also because I viewed success in a very different way then than I do now. So I come from horrible early beginnings, very abusive. I'm born to a drug addicted teenage mother who was very abusive to me. I was adopted out of that, but my adoptive family was lower socioeconomic position. My dad was a janitor. My mom was a secretary. So I remember at some point she's like, Tori, you need to do better than us. And I don't think, Shilpa, that she needed to say that to me because for me, I was just determined I'm going to be better than biology or circumstance. And so there was a push for me. And so, as much as I loved what I was doing, I also identified what I was doing with the version of success I thought I needed to achieve. So, moving higher up the corporate ladder came with greater compensation, came with material wealth that I never had growing up. So that was early definition of success. And yes, I was doing what I loved. But I remember having this sort of epiphany moment in my early 30s on a host of fronts where I was just like around being one, I think I loved myself finally, like truly after, not always thinking I was worthy. So one, loving myself, having a different viewpoint of what success really was, and thinking about legacy and impact and what do I want to do in the world and be known for. And that's where even the shift from a leadership perspective too, like just showing up very, very differently, where it all changed for me.
And you mentioned happiness and having that shift. And again, I noticed this pattern in your life is that these moments of discovering passion or moments of understanding what is true happiness and making conscious changes appears to have, I would say, manifest early in life. When you recognized happiness, could you break that down for what it means, what it meant then, and now fast forward, what does true happiness mean for you? And how can we, as modern day leaders, lean into the understanding what is true happiness?
Yeah, I, I think the word is so abused when we talk about authenticity. Um, but there's not a better word for me to describe and how connected that is to my happiness. And um, so for me, the ability to be my authentic self. So I feel like I hid for a lot of years, or at least in the larger context. There's lots of people close to me who knew elements of my lived experience, but I think I outwardly showed a tremendous amount of confidence. Yet inside, I didn't feel it, and for a long time, I didn't feel worthy. I think I sought affirmation externally quite a bit rather than just knowing I am good, I am worthy. And so happiness came from that inward self reflection and awareness and self love and the ability to just be my authentic self. And so for me, that meant, and very particularly from a leadership perspective, that I could share, I could do the storytelling. I could say where I'd come from because it's a big driver of why I push as hard as I do, why I am who I am today. And I could be vulnerable with people. I think I've almost always been good at saying, "Hey, I don't know what I don't know, but I'm going to go find it for you and follow through on my commitment." But I gained way more confidence in doing that, but also in things like sharing that I've been put in positions. I've been a part of or supported over 40 mergers, acquisitions, and more corporate restructure than I can count. That's hard. And when we talk about corporate restructure, you're impacting people's livelihood and the ability to, not make it about me and like cry necessarily with a person I have to lay off, but like just to share the emotion behind some of the decisions that get made. I just felt like that in itself was freeing. And also just connected to like the joy and happiness piece. Um, Gaining clarity. I'm very clear on the kind of work I do and I don't like, the kind of leadership and culture I want to work in. I sign a lot of my social media posts with two hashtags. One is unstoppable because nothing will prevent me from achieving a goal or objective. But the two is no excuses. And that just more around we can't prevent the adversity or challenges that will come our way necessarily, but we do have a choice in how we respond to it. And so for me, where I've been put into situations where I'm not feeling great joy or happiness, I'll try and change it. And then at some point, the choice I have is to stay um, or leave. If you stay, you got to stop bitching about it. But then make a choice to leave. And so I gained a lot more confidence with that too. And I think the fact that I was happy showing up to work at least 80% of the time. It's the 80-20 rule for me. Made me a very different leader and supported, the team in a much more human way.
And often the human aspect of who we are as leaders or who we are in a professional environment is different than the part that is seen outside. And I wanted to get your perspective on that because as leaders that are, like the term it may be overused, but authentically showing up, how do you maybe, I would say, inspire future generations of leaders to know that it's okay to show up as both versions and maybe both versions need to be the same?
I think the latter for sure. There's no different version of Victoria that you get when I'm in an office, a work environment to outside of work. Now, do I wear funny and inappropriate t-shirts sometimes at the gym? Sure. I'm not necessarily posting that on LinkedIn, but really it's all the same version of Victoria. And so I would say it should be for the same reason. I also, when people talk about work-life balance, no, 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 no. It's all just life and let's find a way to integrate it. And that's why I don't think there should be a separation. And so showing up as our whole human self, um, you know, means that you don't have to pretend who did I say what to, et cetera. For me, as I said, it's freeing to have been able to do that. And so people know, and what you see is what you get. There's an incredible amount of trust that gets built. I think it just, and I'll tell particularly newer professionals coming into the work world, just remind them that people do business with people they like and they trust. And therefore they'll want to do businesses, whether that's hire you, give you business, whatever it is. And so it pays dividends just to be yourself. And it doesn't mean you're going to be liked by everyone. And I don't think you should be all things to all people. Um, but that sense of living authentically is great for you. It's great for employees. It's great for your customers. It's great for business.
I love that. And I wish I had had that type of, I would say, guidance or support or lens into the leadership world when I was starting in corporate. And so, having asked that, what advice or experience would you find yourself giving to offer some peer support or mentorship to a new generation of women, or maybe women that may have come from a subculture that was, a little bit challenging to really open up and be who you are and really shine your light?
Um, I I'm going to share with you a quote that it's one of my favorite quotes, but it's important as it relates to this sort of notion of being authentic. It's by George Adair, and it says, "Everything you've ever wanted lives on the other side of fear." And particularly, for people who had to deal with whether it's religious or cultural or other expectations and boundaries put around them. I mean, that is uncomfortable. And so, or for even for those who don't. I mean, I'm a yes, I'm a queer woman, but I'm still incredibly fortunate to be born white and born in North America. So recognizing the privilege, that I have, but I felt some of those boundaries. And so being my authentic self, although with privilege, hasn't always felt comfortable. And so the advice I would give is to lean into the fear and the discomfort. Even if it's just baby steps, it gets easier. But I truly think that to that quote, whatever you want sits on the other side of it. I think it's growth and opportunity comes when you put yourself in the place of discomfort.
And Victoria, you've accomplished things that I believe a lot of people like myself find wonderful. I mean, like just to say, be able to say you were in the C-level roles and being able to make choices yet from your heart-centered approach. Could you share a little bit about, in that capacity, what mindfulness practices you have brought into your role?
Um, Many. So um, some will think potentially not because I am a when I said I don't like to be asked about work life balance. It's about work life integration. But there's elements, that are definitely my choice and that contribute to mindfulness, wellness, all these pieces. So, first is like it's my choice. I tell my teams, do as I say, not as I do. When it comes to particularly going on vacation, I choose to not fully disconnect because I don't want to come back to thousands of emails. I don't take conference calls. I don't ask that of my team. That's my choice. But that actually gives me a little bit of sanity and actually helps keep me a little bit calmer. But other things that I do, I'm very much I've been like a fitness fanatic the majority of my life, and I work out early in the morning. So one, it means making a choice. This is where I come to like no excuses when people say they can't find time to like be fit and healthy. Well, if you're Netflixing all night and getting to bed really late, then it's going to be hard to get up in the morning if you're a morning person like me. So I make sure I'm in bed at a reasonable time. And then I block my calendar because I find, and in many times I've been in global roles. And so they'll try and book me, early in the morning. Well, that's my workout time. And then I need to come home and shower and get ready for work and like somewhat presentable to get on a call. And so I block my calendar. I also find a couple slots throughout the day to give me that calming space, even if it's a quick bio break, or just to respond to emails so that I'm not doing it all at night. So there's things like that. That's prioritizing me, my health. And then I will also say, going back to what brings me joy or value and the creation of boundaries. And so, and I, kn- it, I will acknowledge it's a lot easier as an executive to say no to things. But I would even encourage those who are newer in the workforce to figure out how to create that early on, in either saying no, delegate, outsource to the extent you can. Again, I get it when you're earlier in in your career and you're the one who gets all the stuff sort of dumped on you. But those are ways in which I've been very mindful and I think helps me be more effective as a leader.
And so, Victoria, that idea that you mentioned that you block out time and being very conscious, again, given that maybe early in your career you don't always have the ability to have those boundaries, but now that you're, I would say, more seasoned, what other ways in which do you find yourself practicing the art of setting boundaries and doing it in a way that's still, I would say, gentle? Because sometimes having those conversations, it can happen on all levels, even as a solopreneur. I find myself going, well, I need to say it, but how do I say it?
Yeah, I think the fact that I've built trust with people, going back to being authentic and transparent and building relationships from a real place of genuine care, and compassion helps me have the difficult conversations. I love the concept of, and I feel like I've always operated with it. I just didn't have the vernacular until Kim Scott wrote her book, Radical Candor. So the combination of building trust and solid relationships with people and then being able to have the tough conversation from a place of care and compassion is received much more effectively, by people. Uh, and it also is about being incredibly comfortable and true to, myself. And like, I'm not going to feel settled if I don't have it. So I've always been all cards on the table kind of girl. Like, we're not going to have a meeting after the meeting. And so, it's, much like I said, step into your discomfort. Like, it's not always comfortable, but I feel genuinely like there's so much more progress and the health of the relationships with people and business is so much better by like blending, that radical candor with like the trusted relationships together.
And do you find yourself also applying that, I would say, wisdom in, now back to your personal life, that candor, whether it's with a partner or children, and how does that help you be more present with them?
It does. So I utilize it in all facets of my life. From, one is like I am very giving of my time. advice when asked. And there's times where I felt taken advantage of it. There was a woman who worked for me many, many years ago. And I feel like the only time I ever hear from her, even though I often just, when my strategy for maintaining and, my network is when someone pops into my mind, and probably drives my husband a little bit crazy, but I'll grab my phone and send them a quick message on LinkedIn or a text or an email. I'm like, hey, I just thought of you. Like, I hope you're doing well. Talk soon. And so I would do that with her. Yet the only time I felt like I heard from her was when she needed something from me. And after it had happened the third or fourth time, I did actually have the conversation with her, which I think for many would be very difficult. And I said, look, insert her name, like, I just got to share this with you. I'm feeling kind of like used a little bit in this. And maybe it's like I said, it's probably unintentional, but I just want you to be aware. So from that to, a good friend of mine has in all the time we've known one another, she's never really been partnered. And she and I had this cadence and dynamic of how often we spoke on like through text, mostly text, and it changed. And I had to tell her, like, I miss you. I miss like we had that, and being really vulnerable. And if we need to set a new normal, then let's do that. To in my relationship with my husband and my children, also having some of those dialogues. Like, I pay for my kids' phones and I'm like, that's so that you will communicate with me, guys. Like, so please, like, I just want to hear from you. Right. So I do it in all facets of my life, and, again, it's freeing, like, I feel like I have a heavy burden because I'm afraid to tell people what I'm thinking or feeling.
And I really love the way you articulated those different examples because, I mean, more spiritually speaking, if you keep it all locked in, it starts manifesting into something heavier and deeper. So it's good that you're able to liberate that energy. Now, going back to something that's a little more into the business side, I'd like to ask you, how do you ensure that our leadership styles is more inclusive and it supports diverse voices? And again, I mentioned early on having that background of a different culture and then having to find my voice in a corporate world. And now as a business owner, it can be daunting. And there, I often found lack of female peer support or leadership that can be empathetic. So maybe you could speak to that and just the role of inclusion.
I, I I I talk to a lot of leaders around, recognizing that, this diversity, equity, and inclusion is not a tick in the box for, like, the ESG initiatives and signing off for, like, our shareholders and those kind, like, it is not just the right thing to do. I mean, it is good for business. One. So that's like just foundationally because sometimes I hear, and sadly sitting, here in the US, and I happen to live in South Florida, and our governor's repealing like diversity initiatives and people and whatever. And so I'm like, let's just get grounded in how good it is for employees as well as for our shareholders. One. Next is um, we need to be strategically intentional about how we create diverse workforces. And then, more importantly, as you said, inclusion. What I see is there's a focus on bringing in diverse talent in the front door, and then we don't create the environment and we're losing them out the back almost as fast as we've brought them in. And so the strategic intentionality is everything from understanding the place from which we're starting, and then under setting realistic and maybe aggressive but realistic goals in terms of how we're going to move the needle forward. And then with intention going out to make some changes and starting to measure very different outcomes. If all we're focused on is the shareholder value of new sales and revenue and profitability without all of the other pieces that we want to talk about culture and we want to talk about a sense of belonging and inclusion. Well, then I don't like to have to pay leaders to do the right thing, although we know incentive drives behavior. So like creating, performance metrics around employee engagement, around the improvement in our diverse workforce, et cetera. And then there's a whole lot of education that has to come. Creating an inclusive workplace is often about creating safety, psychological safety, the fact that people can show up authentically them. And if that's being from a different culture or background, like when it comes to lunchtime, not being afraid that you're going to bring something and worry about what the smell it might's going to, come across in the employee lunchroom kind of thing. So there's just a lot that we need to do to arm leaders, particularly who don't understand. We all have different lived experiences. So I think a big part of it comes around understanding bias, around um, being intellectually curious about others, and talking with leaders how to do that while going back to the whole notion of being authentic that creates that bond and trust with employees.
It's interesting you should mention the food. I was just watching a movie. I think it was about the astronaut million miles away or something. I forget the title, but it was a Hispanic who was the first astronaut who went to space, and he was afraid to bring in enchiladas to work because of the smell. And I remember maybe something similar, just bringing in Indian food. Now, but even as a woman who went through the career process, often you don't know what you don't know. And I don't know if things have shifted or changed in the last 10 years. But when it comes to recognizing, say, for example, it could be that you're like, I should have the ability to be promoted. I'm really good. I've had a good performance review for several years. Yet you see, and I saw this for myself, as other men would get the promotion and there was no one to talk to about it. Now, how do we change that? And now I'm no longer in that space, but what voice, what legacy can we leave behind for the next generations so that that seed of thought is there that maybe that person that needs that help, they don't even know how to voice it.
I think, um, I mean, there's two sides to that coin. There is the employee themselves who needs to understand their value and their worth. And so there's some self awareness, there's some knowledge of external sort of market, clarity around your performance to be able to gain confidence moving forward and saying, hey, like, I want that promotion. I want that new role. I think my bonus should have been X versus Y. And being able to articulate that with confidence. Again, that's not always comfortable, but I think that there's a lot. You're the CEO of your career and of your brand. Do not put anyone else in the driver's seat. So that's the one side of the coin. The other is from a leadership perspective, we need to be, going back to my phrase around strategically intentional, around identifying um, particularly diverse talent, uh, and finding a way to raise them up, finding a way to create opportunities for them, being the sponsor for them. And the sponsor versus a mentor is the sponsor is the one who's advocating for them when they are not in the room. And it's incumbent upon us as leaders to recognize that if we want to see that needle move forward, then we need to be comfortable, finding the diverse talent who's a strong performer. Maybe they don't have all the skills to make the next hop, but they've got potential. And I, as their leader, am either going to find the education or the tools necessary to give them those skills, and I will invest in the coaching to ensure they get there. And so that's finding that and pulling them out and creating that opportunity as much as at an individual employee level, you need to be advocating for yourself.
That's wonderful, Victoria. Is there any parting words you have for those who are in this space and recognizing I have a story to tell, it's important, and finding value in it, knowing that someone out there is listening, going, that will shift my life.
Um, I I feel like I've shared with you some. Normally, I leave these conversations sharing my quote around fear, um, and about talking about you being in the driver's seat. I want your listeners to understand that, I mean, you define success, you define what brings you happiness and joy, and you create the opportunity to be your own version of, in my words, unstoppable. So that anchoring around a goal, objective, a vision for yourself, and not letting like anyone create boundaries for you. And that doesn't mean that you might not fail, but I want to give yourself permission to fail, get back up, go back to like that goal or vision you have, and always remember like one foot in front of the other is progress.
Yes, isn't there a quote, it's like 1,000 steps to reach a certain milestone, and I do that for every part of my life. I truly believe that your wisdom and your story and words will leave a huge impact on my listeners. Would you be willing to share maybe 15 seconds of how you would endorse our episode so that it can help collectively bring in more people to listen and tune in?
Yeah, well, for sure. Well, I mean, your listeners, first of all, can find me on my website, which is victoria-pelletier.com. I share a lot of the podcasts and other media that I do directly there. And I have a very large following. And so it makes sense to tag me in all the socials so that I can also like and comment and share there as well.
Wonderful, Victoria. Thank you so much. And hopefully, maybe we can have another deeper conversation around this as well in the future.
Thank you.